Hello, welcome to Men's Health Connected for what is the final session of our series this year. Today, we're focusing on male suicide prevention and looking at the national picture. I'm Glenn Poole. I'm CEO of the Australian Men's Health Forum. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we meet from around Australia today. I'm joining you from the land of the Belai, the Gureng, the Garang Garang, and the Tarbalang Bunda people. That's in central Queensland. So, some of you will have just spent 45 minutes with us looking at our new report, Time to Act on Male Suicide in Australia. You will have mostly been listening to me talking about that. And we had a little bit of a chat at the end. This session is focused on much more on having a bit of a discussion about what we would like to see as a community in the National Suicide Prevention Strategy, which is currently emerging. Before we get into that, though, I'm just going to do a fairly short presentation, just giving you a bit of background for those who don't know on the Australian Men's Health Forum, and then a brief introduction to the national strategy on suicide prevention. So, give me a second while I get my PowerPoint up. A lot of you had already said hello because you were in this morning's session, but for those who are just sort of coming on board, you feel free to pop your details into the chat box there. Hello, everyone. We've got about 40 people in the room. So let us know who you are, where you're coming from. If you represent an organization, let us know who that is. If you've got a particular interest in men's health or male suicide prevention, let us know what that is. If you just want to give a shout out to whatever state and territory you're coming from, you can also do that. So let me just, is this the right presentation? It is. Okay. Let me find the share. Probably need to close down the one from earlier. Let's close it down first. Okay, bear with me, folks. It's the last week of the year. There's lots going on. Right, so if I have that up. For some reason, just give me a second. For some reason, my PowerPoint's not coming up in my share box this time. Share screen. There it is. Okay. Thanks, Robin. So the question we're going to discuss is whether the National Suicide Prevention should look at that. See, I've knocked this together at the last minute. I can't even spell strategy right. So points to those who spot the deliberate spelling mistakes in this rushed PowerPoint presentation. I apologize. Okay, I'm just going to give a bit of a chat about the Australian Men's Health Forum for those who don't know. So we are a peak body for nationally for individuals and organisations working to improve the lives and health of men and boys. We've got over 50 organisational members. And the key thing, they range from small organisations just working in one community to organisations that have got groups all over to Australia, to a couple of the very large NGOs working in men's health. The thing that unites us all is that we're all concerned in some way with improving the lives and health of men and boys. As an organisation, we work across 4 distinct areas. So this is the A, B, C, D of our work. I'll start with the C because this is the foundation of everything we do. The C is about connecting. I used to say it was about connecting the sector, which it still is, but it's also more broadly about connecting sectors. So yes, we try and connect people. We do work to connect people who are working with men and boys, but it's also important that we don't just live in a bubble, and that we also try and connect men's health to other sectors. So we can't tackle an issue like male suicide, for example, if we're not influencing and connecting with the mental health sector and the suicide prevention sector, just as a starting point. So we're about connecting sectors. We trace our history back at least about 30 years to the very first National Men's Health Gathering in 1995, which brought together a range of people working in health and social work, people who are concerned about men's health policy, academics, people running different men's groups around the country. And together, eventually, a number of those people and organisations formed the Australian Men's Health Forum. One of the key things that we did in the early days was advocating for a national male health policy. And Australia remains one of the few countries in the world that does have a male health policy, first launched in 2010 and then renewed as the men's health strategy in 2020. So we have had some success in putting men's health on the national agenda, but clearly, from anyone who's heard us talk at any time, there's much more we think needs to happen to improve the lives and health of men and boys across Australia. So that connecting the sector piece, usually done but through either informal networking or actually the biannual National Men's Health Gathering. But then you'll all be aware that COVID sort of screwed quite a few people over, not least of all those of us who are trying to run events. We were about to run our 25th anniversary National Men's Health Gathering in Melbourne in May 2020, and 2 months before that happened, the country got locked down, and we very quickly, what was the word we used to what we were all saying in 2020? We pivoted very quickly to create an online platform called Men's Health Connected, and had a few thousand people sort of join us throughout June that year, which was great in many ways. It connected us to people who weren't normally able to connect to the work we do. We've continued to run the platform. It's evolving and changing. I'm really keen to keep it going, but also to actually get back out and meet people face to face. So, for example, during Men's Health Week a couple of weeks ago, I flew over to Perth to be part of the WA Men's Health Conference, which is a fantastic event. And if any of you are on here were part of that, thank you. It was superb. When we ask our members what's most important about what we do, and apart from that, connecting to other people in the sector, it's just putting the issue of men's health broadly higher up the public agenda. So that broad awareness stuff, but also in recent years we've recognized the value of not just doing broad awareness but actually giving people tools to talk about men's health. And so our key tool in the awareness space is the Know Your Man Facts campaign, which provides workplaces and communities with simple tools and resources that they can do, have whole conversations and have talks with the men in their community about different aspects of men's health. We're growing that campaign to cover a whole range of men's health issues. And it's in Men's Health Week a couple of weeks ago, I think we had something like 1,000 organizations downloading those tools to give talks in their workplaces and communities. So it's proving a very popular and useful way of getting men's health issues talked about at a community level. Everything we do is steeped in best practice, and for us, best practice is basically what works when working with men. A lot of that is not based on detailed academic research. It's based on community knowledge of individual practitioners and different groups that have been really effective at engaging with men over the years. So, a big principle that we tend to share across our sector is that men's health is not about getting more men to get help or getting men better at getting help. It's predominantly about making services better at helping men. So a big question, our experience is if you actually provide services and support in a way that works for men, then men will respond by accessing that support and those services. And so the big focus of our best practice work, we try and embed best practice in everything we do, is to take a strengths-based approach and think about how can we actually make our approach to health more male-friendly. And then the D of the ABCD is decision-making. It's called decision-making because it begins with a D. Otherwise, it would be the ABCP, because what we're talking about there is really policy work. It's our advocacy and policy work. And this conversation sits in that space. Yes, we have a national men's health strategy, but most activity that happens in the world of health and mental health doesn't take place under the men's health strategy. It happens elsewhere in government. So we're constantly looking at how can we influence government policy and strategy, not just at a federal level, but at a state and territory level, to get more focus on the needs of men and boys. It's a slow, laborious process, but it's a really important one and a big part of what we do, and it's why we're having this conversation today. So in terms of health, our simple program logic is that basically, if we embed what we do in best practice, what works for men, and we raise awareness and we connect the sector and we do advocacy and policy work in a way that leads to action that improves men's self-care, but also leads to better healthcare, then ultimately that will improve men's health. That's a very narrow program logic, because it's really focused on getting more men into healthcare services. We also recognize more broadly that men's health is shaped by a whole range of social determinants, which we're concerned with, but often sit outside of our area of influence. Things like boys' education, homelessness, men's working lives, men's experience within family and relationship, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about men's health, it's interesting this, just anecdotally, and I've been working with men and boys in different ways for 20, 25 years now. And when, I used to go out to parties and social occasions and people say, what do you do? And you sort of go, oh, kind of working with men. People didn't know what the hell you were talking about. Maybe sort of like 15, 20 years ago, you said men's health. People say, oh yeah, prostate cancer, testicular cancer, you mean. More recently, in the last sort of 10 years or so, you say to someone at a party, I work in men's health, and they'll start to tell you a story all about men's. They instantly add mental. I don't mean they say you're mental. I mean, but they instantly add the word mental and start talking about them, not that what they know about men's mental health and male suicide. So the public perception of what we think of as men's health has broadened. Though in public conversation, we still very much get hung up on a deficit conversation. That I know, because I do lots of TV and radio interviews during Men's Health Week, and without a fail, you start to have a conversation about men's health, and people ask the question, oh, why aren't men as good at looking after their health as women? Are men getting better at looking after their health? What can we do to make men better at looking after their health, better at opening up, and all those things? It's very much a kind of the public narrative about men's health is very much focused on the individual and the deficit sort of model. There are lots of different ways you can conceptualize men's health. These are just 6 of them. It's a medical issue like prostate cancer, testicular cancer, mental health issues like depression, anxiety. Or more broadly, it's about this broad range of social issues that men and boys face, like, boys in education, experiences of fatherhood, and so on. For some people, in terms of actually what we need to do, it's about simply working with gender norms, like the men's shed, shoulder to shoulder, not face to face. It's about actually just recognizing men are the way they are, so we need to adapt our services to the way men are and go out and meet men. A phrase you'll often hear in the men's health sector is meeting men where they are. And there's certainly lots of evidence to show that approach can be really effective at engaging men in different aspects of their health. But there's also a growing movement which is focused on the expansion of gender norms, actually expanding what it does mean to be a man, to having deeper, more sort of heart-to-heart conversations about health. And that also is a very valuable approach. And often the two overlap anyway. So that once you have an initiative like a men's shed, which is built on gender norms, men like to build stuff in sheds, you build a community where actually it's more the norm to actually open up and talk about health concerns and issues. So the gender norms are expanded in the process of actually engaging through something which is very stereotypically male, being in a shed and fixing stuff. For a lot of us, the reason why we consider men's health to be an issue is because it's an equality issue, and the stats are really clear on that. I'll share some in a minute. You'll have heard most of them before, but there's a very strong objective case to be made that men's health is worse than women's health in lots of ways, and therefore that should be a concern. But also for a lot of people, men's health is about equity. So it's about the difference between different populations of men. It's the fact that Aboriginal men will have far worse health outcomes than the non-Indigenous men, that men from poorer backgrounds will have worse health outcomes than the richest men. The men from rural backgrounds will have worse outcomes from many in cities, and so on and so forth. We would assert, broadly speaking, that men's health is all of this and more besides, and you kind of need a balance and a combination of all these approaches. So here are some of those facts and figures, most of which I'm sure you'll have heard before. 3 in 4 suicides are men. The vast majority of workplace deaths are men. One that's not heard so much, and I wish it was heard more, because heart disease deaths are fairly equal between men and women, but in terms of actual premature deaths, 4 in 5 people dying from heart disease under the age of 75 are men. So it gets men a lot earlier. And that's the biggest killer of men, the biggest contributor to the fact that men born in Australia die 7 years younger than women born in Australia on average. And in all of that, we're all going to die of something, right? We actually recognize that death is coming to all of us. I'm sorry if that's a shock to anyone today, for the younger members of today's audience. But yeah, death is coming to all of us. The key concern is about premature death. It's like deaths that could have been avoided, deaths that could have been avoided and meant that a man could have had a longer life, contributed more, had more time with his family, with his children, with his grandchildren, lives that could be avoided, deaths that could be avoided. And in terms of preventable deaths, men account for 2 in 3 of those. And there are something like 50 men a day dying from causes that could have been avoided. So a lot of us will be familiar, particularly in this conversation, that 6 men a day die from suicide. And that's something which we all want to do more about. But that sits in with a bigger number of 50 men a day who are dying from a broad range of preventable health causes. Now, this doesn't excite many people, but I like it. It's a model. It comes from the World Health Organization. It maps out different approaches to working with gender. You won't be surprised to know that it wasn't really developed with men in mind. It's called something like the Gender Responsive Assessment Scale. It's got a catchy name like that, but really it's about work with women, but equally there's no reason why it can't be applied with work with men. The key point in this model for me is the gender blind point. We tend to think that, sometimes you even hear people saying in our space, oh, services should be gender blind, they shouldn't be discriminating or treating people differently. The reality is that for a lot of the time, if you don't take gender into account, then the service doesn't work. So no one's asking for example, a gender blind approach to breast cancer screening. Men do die of breast cancer. I think they account for 1 or maybe 2% of people who die from breast cancer, but no one that I've ever met is advocating for a gender blind approach to breast cancer screening where every single citizen is screened for breast cancer. That doesn't make sense. It's poor use of resources. So we don't have a gender blind approach to breast cancer screening. We have a gender focused approach to breast cancer screening, which recognizes that 98% of people with breast cancer are women, and therefore it makes total sense to target those towards women with a particular gender focus. Now, we know that gender blind often doesn't work, even though most of the health system operates in a gender blind way. And that's why we actually have a women's health strategy and a men's health strategy. I would argue that on this sort of scale, the women's health approach is far more developed and nuanced. It's taking much more of what's known as a gender responsive approach, taking into account the context of women's lives, whereas the men's health strategy is more sort of gender focused and sort of specifically names and targets men, but isn't great at sort of taking into account the broader needs of men and boys. And that's more so the case when you actually look at the social determinants of health. So we've already acknowledged that men's health is shaped by this broad range of other issues like boys' education, like our working lives, our experiences of fatherhood, and so on and so forth. Yet when you look at broad range of social issues that impact men and boys, these are pretty much nowhere in the government system of policy. And so we consistently have a gender blind approach to issues that seem to be impacting men more than women. So things like homelessness, boys struggling in education, there are no specific gendered policies to tackle those. In contrast, we have a broad range of approaches to addressing the different social issues that women and girls face. I wanted to find a really quick and simple way of illustrating this quite complex point. So what I did was I sat down for half an hour and I tried to map out some of the many different frameworks and strategies and policies and structures that are in place to address the social issues that impact women and girls at a government level. I got to about 40 and then I stopped. So across sort of gender, there's these six areas of activity broadly around rights, economics, work, safety, health, and equity. And then these initiatives are then replicated, these approaches are then replicated at every state and territory level. So I got to 40. I reckon if I kept going, I could have got to at least 100 possibly. And then I spent a few minutes doing the same for men. I didn't need to spend half an hour doing the same for men, because when you do the same exercise for men, you get a very different picture, which is like this. So in terms of the amount of focus that we as a society put on the health and social issues that impact women and girls, there is a clear difference between our focus on the social issues that impact women and girls, and to be absolutely clear, in no way advocating that this shouldn't be the case. All of these issues are significant and serious issues that it's absolutely appropriate for us to be trying to address. And then we look at the health and social issues that impact men and boys, and there's pretty much no mechanisms in place whatsoever. It really starts to thin out when you get down to state and territory level. Now, we could chat for hours and sort of talk about how we could fill out this entire map and whether we should fill out this entire map for men and boys. But as a starting point, one of the things that we're most concerned about are, A, that we put in place men's health policies at every state and territory level to actually build on the national men's health policy, but also that we think about developing a national male suicide prevention plan, because although we've got a men's health strategy which mentions male suicide, none of the activity on male suicide prevention takes place underneath that strategy. It all takes place under the national suicide prevention strategy, which doesn't include a specific focus at the moment on male suicide. So broadly speaking, when we look at gender, part of the challenge we have is that pretty much all health initiatives are gender blind, and most gender initiatives are blind to men, and so men's health falls between that gap. And I won't go through all of these, but here are some specific examples we've started to gather of how health initiatives overlook gender and how gender initiatives overlook men. The key one for us in this conversation is that despite the fact that 3 in 4 suicides are men, we find that up to 4 in 5 users of government-funded services are female. And that's because we're taking a gender-blind approach to suicide prevention, which isn't asking the question, how effective are these services that we are funding at reaching men and boys? So that's the background chit chat for you. Now on to the National Suicide Prevention Strategy. Just briefly, we have a department in government now called the National Suicide Prevention Office, the NSPO, which is, as we speak, consulting on and developing the next National Suicide Prevention Strategy. This is what we know about the shape of it. It's got 4 enablers, 4 shared principles, and probably most importantly, 5 key areas of focus. We've already participated in some consultation on this from a perspective of men, but we want to go back to the National Suicide Prevention Office and have a second, third, fourth, fifth chat with them before they publish the document to make the case for more focus on men. What I'm interested to do in this session now is to stop talking and start listening, and to get your sort of thoughts and feedback on the different aspects of this strategy. So we'll break it down. I'm going to go through the shared principles of the enablers, but I'll mostly ask you to chat about the focus areas, because I think that's where the action takes place. So shared principles. Clearly, it says in there, we need to address the needs of disproportionately impacted populations. So that does open a door to say, well, hang on a minute, 3 in 4 suicides are men. So what are you going to do to address the needs of men? So there's certainly a strong case in the logic. There's also the shared principle here. A lot of you in this conversation will know that part of the case that the men's sector has been making for years is that we need to move from a mental health approach to actually include situational distress within suicide prevention. it's good to see here that within the shared principles that it says we need to recognise and respond to the diverse drivers of distress. So there's an opportunity for us to actually saying, well, what are you doing specifically about the types of distress that put men on the path to suicide? Then in terms of the enablers, there's some things there that we can potentially work with. I'm not going to go into that in great detail. Of course, all these things are important. There needs to be good governance. There needs to be good data. I think one of the areas, particularly in this, where we need more of a male focus, is both in the embedding of lived experience. So does that lived experience include a diversity of men? And workforce and community capacity, as I mentioned in the talk earlier this morning, vast majority of people working in, volunteering in and trained in suicide prevention are women. What are we actually going to do to increase the number of men engaged in suicide prevention? And there's potentially some opportunities there in terms of the cross-portfolio stuff and government collaboration. Yeah, we'll see. So the final slide. These are the 5 areas that the National Suicide Prevention Strategy will focus on. And it goes through a sort of like a pyramid of increasing kind of intensity. So it starts with this basic of general well-being, helping people thrive, tackling distress, responding in when people are struggling with earlier intervention, crisis point support, and also long-term support from those recovering from suicide attempts or suicidality. I'm gonna open up the floor. I think we'll try going through those one at a time, perhaps, and start with that broad kind of like enhancing well-being piece. Be interested to hear your thoughts. What would you like to see in a national suicide prevention strategy that would actually broadly help improve men's mental health and well-being? So you can use your hand, pop your hand up. You can pop comments in the chat box. So looking for the chat here.
Then we've got Paul and Ben who are ready with their hands up.
Okay, Ben, we've not heard from you today yet. So Ben Wadham, I know you've got a great focus on vets, Ben, but
yeah, thanks, Glenn. The interesting preamble there. Thanks for that. Yeah, obviously I'm well, not obviously, but I'm here to talk about male veteran suicide. From Flinders University, we're doing research in that space. Which I had your slides up again with the focus areas, but I think one male veteran suicide in a particular group, sort of lower end of service years, up to about 4 years sort of service, age 20 to 39, about 34 and 100,000 take their lives. So I've got a Royal Commission at the moment. Some key things that look at those focus areas are early intervention. So working out male veteran needs before transition. Transition's a point of vulnerability as well as a point of opportunity. So early intervention there, understanding what the mental and physical and social health needs are of veterans prior to leaving, so that they transition into a space, working with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the ex-service sector to identify the right sort of services and supports that they need. Loneliness and social connection is a massive part of that transition experience for many male veterans. As we know, it's an issue for men generally. So being able to separate from military culture, retain your connection to it as a veteran, but then develop new relationships, not just in the military space, but also in the civilian space. So that means engaging with those sort of services post the agency's post service. Male veteran suicide isn't just about deployment issues. In fact, some research suggests that's a protective factor, but it is in the research we've done, seen that if there is deployment trauma, that's one thing, but then how it's dealt with by defence and the ADA and DVA afterwards, and the veteran sector is where that trauma can turn into suicidality and self-harm. So I think another key element is that male veterans, I mean, it's different across the services, because there's Army, Navy, Air Force, and there are support services, and then there are combat corps. But particularly in those martial corps or combat corps, there's a very strong kind of what I call martial masculinity, what I think people would wrongly call toxic masculinity. That's why we're trained in that space. Yes, there are some downsides to some of that culture and behaviour which could be addressed, but in terms of a health issue, veterans are very good at managing challenge and crisis, but very poor at dealing with trauma and or dealing with social connection post service. So there's also a bigger, larger question there about what kind of military are we, what sort of service members are we, and how do we build that so that it's more integrated, so that on the one hand we can still we're there, we can do our jobs effectively, but we can also look after ourselves and others after service or after challenge and crisis. Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Ben. Couple of questions for you as well, if you don't mind. So clearly, veterans are, well, it's men and women, but it's a group that's predominantly male still and has specific needs. You said something there about the transitioning and integrating into civilian life. To what extent do you think it's important to have, specialist services for veterans, and to what extent do you think it's valuable to have broader services for men that vets can also connect into? Are both of those important, or does it always have to be for vets?
I think they're both important, Glenn. So we've just finished a national study on veterans in prison, which are a very different, specific group. But, they have such distinct experiences of trauma that they move into the prison system, which is very generic. For example, it came up and again that the prison services wouldn't address their PTS because that wasn't the right environment to do with it. It opened up a can of worms. But, and they would say, I don't want to talk to a prison psychologist because they don't understand me or the system that I've come from. Yeah, and I think that's not just the prison population. I think that extends also to the general veteran population. So Open Arms provides that specific service, but veterans sometimes, because of their experiences, may not want to engage with those as well. So opening up to more community psychologists and community social health and that sort of thing as well is important.
Right, and just another question, if I may, Ben. Well, I've got your beautiful, brilliant, big brain with this. From all the work that you've done on veterans, and obviously male veterans in particular, are the lessons that we can transfer to the broader male population?
I think the broader male population or broader men's health movement is ahead of the military men's health movement, if that makes sense. Right. I think I talk about vulnerability stigma. I know that this has sort of expressions in broader society. We know about sort of stoic masculinity and stuff, but it's pretty strong in the military. So not only do you not want to admit that you've got a problem yourself, but you don't want to tell your mates or anyone else in the authority structure because it brings attention to you and brings negative sanctions. I think we can learn about. I think there's been some great work over the years in you know, about different forms of masculinity and different, more compassionate forms and an ethic of care. And I think that the military grapples with that because it sees its job as so much about, you know, the more combat or martial end. And so I think the military, the veterans can learn from that space. I mean, there's more too, but I don't want to talk forever.
That's great. Thanks, Ben. Have you got, I know we were with you in October, I think it was, in Adelaide for military men's mental health seminar. Have you got anything coming up in the next sort of 12 months that you want to make us aware of?
Well, actually, we just gave a couple of talks in Adelaide and Canberra about incorporating much of the research on this space is very biopsycho or you know, physical, mental, and like in your slides there, Glenn, you know, we really need to boost the social aspect of this because you know, you can serve and you can transition. If you have a mental health issue or a physical health issue, that's one thing, but it's compounded if you can't get good services, access, understanding, good transition services, housing, mobility, you know, that whole gamut of things. I think one area that I'm really interested in at the moment, which we're looking at something maybe up at the Gold Coast, is later in the year, is either bringing together men's and women's to understand the relationality of that. Because you know we talk about men's health, and I think all the things you said are correct, but you know, it is a relational concept, and the two feed off each other. So the other one is Indigenous male veteran health. Absolutely, that's totally. So I've employed an Aboriginal man to go out and create those relationships so that we can try and find and talk to them. And the initial response has been great. There's no research on this aspect at all.
Right, thanks. Thanks for being here, Ben, and thanks for what you've shared. Kit, not heard from you today. Lovely to see you. Kit Scott, Robin, I think you're unmuted now. Try now.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious in that strategy, where it also address, like, you know, men dealing with unhealthy relationship dynamics. Yeah, that is like, I'm aware of many men that are struggling in that space, and instead of ending the relationship, they end their life.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I'm not writing the strategy, right? So so you could make the case for that to be included in the section that's about drivers of distress, for example. If I could sort of pull the conversation a bit back to where we are, which is that is firstly that question of building resilience, essentially, so that men can thrive. What in your experience is needed to help men thrive in relationship?
Yeah, like I think the drivers of distress is important to mention, but I feel that when we're not talking about like the elephant in the room issues, yeah, like whether it be like unhealthy relationship behaviors, and then when people just don't have the skills to navigate that. Whether it be like then when men and women are dealing with the court system and all the stress that adds on. Yeah, so I feel that speaking to it, like actually what people are experiencing, like relationship, unhealthy relationships, are calling it what it is rather than like when we label it as something else.
Yeah, so what works in that space, Kit? Because obviously that's your area of interest and concern. What do we need to do more of?
I feel when I'm thinking of different addiction recovery groups I've been part of, like giving men the skills needed to actually address the unhealthy behaviors that are playing out in relationships. Yeah, equipping them with the skills and abilities rather than when they don't have them and they're using unhealthy behaviors to then numb.
So building relationship skills would be a part of building resilience.
Yeah. And the second point as well, to do with neurodiversity, I don't see this being addressed in the suicide prevention space either. a lot of men that are neurodiverse. So it's like addressing those men that do also think and feel and process differently.
Yes, excuse me. I've just got locked on my screen here somehow. I can't see you. There we go. Got you. No. Am I sharing my screen, Robin? No.
No, you're not sharing the screen, Glenn.
Sorry, and I've lost Kit. Has she dropped off?
Yeah, she just dropped off for me as well.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a really. Oh, she's there. There you are. Yeah. Sorry, you're exactly where you were a minute ago. You haven't moved personally. Just on my screen, you moved around somehow. So yeah, that's a really important. I mean, these are all important points. But this question of neurodiversity is one that's been sort of tapping at my shoulder quite a lot recently. Because it's clearly an area where men are overrepresented, and I think, particularly a very simplistic analysis of neurodiversity is that men who are neurodiverse have on the Asperger's or autism spectrum don't have the same innate abilities in terms of processing emotions. And if all of our focus is on how do you make it better for men to process their emotions, that's a terrible thing to be saying to a man with autism who's suicidal, because it's completely not recognizing the fact that he has got specific challenges in terms of how he processes and makes sense of the world. So yeah, I think it's really missing from the conversation. What you'd have, for example, in priority populations is people with mental illness or people with disability. I've pretty much not seen neurodiversity mentioned, and I welcome any. I'm not experienced in that space, so I'm stumbling even with the language to talk about it right now. But if anyone's got any contribution on that, I'd really like to hear it, because it's an issue we'd like to put more focus on in the coming months. Right. Anyone else on? I'm also interested to hear. So we're talking about building sort of like the building resilience piece, the helping men thrive. And I think for me, a big part of that, this is one of the places where a lot of the sort of grassroots men's groups, the men's walks, the Mr. Perfects come in. Sean, you got something? Is it Sean? Do you want to jump in? Sean Tahu? Just Robin just needs to unmute you, Sean, just a second. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. You can correct me now. Robin, have we got Sean? Shaan Tahu.
Oh, wrong person. Sorry. I think we did now. Sorry.
All good. Thanks,
Right.
Glenn. Thanks,
Tell me
Robin.
how am I supposed to say your name, please?
You got it right. It's Sean.
Go.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity too, mate. I guess from the conversation that we were having this morning in regards to how do we help men thrive, I love the concept of the situational issues and supporting men in that space. Myself, I'm a suicide survivor of 2011. And so, and that was brought upon into in a situational sort of aspect. And it's why mental health is like near and dear to my health, in my heart, and that's why I'm helping out with Walk It Off up in Springwood. Okay. Simplistically, if we focused on probably three main areas, you've got your health, physical health and well-being. So getting people out walking, doing simple stuff, just eating right, and having that as a priority. Your second one would be wealth, and having problems in their workplace and being able to manage all of that kind of stuff, and how to get a job properly, and direct that sort of conversation. And then your third one is relationships, like we were talking about before. If we fundamentally deal with those things and provide a little bit of support for guys and make it okay to ask for help in that space, I think that would be really beneficial for reducing that concept of situational issues throughout the whole thing. Like, those are the three main aspects that I see that I've struggled with in the past. Once I got them dialed in, things got a little bit easier, and then we can have the conversation about thriving after that. Once you've got a decent foundation of, three aspects, so that you can, one, you've got a safe place to go and feel heard and safe to be able to have a open conversation and speak from your heart and talk honestly. I think that that's fundamentally important in this day and age at the moment. But that narrative is very different to what it was based, even in our lifetime and growing up in, over the last 40 odd, 50 odd years. That conversation, it's never been really addressed, as that stigma still sits pretty proudly at the moment, where men just don't talk and don't want to talk about it. And when we're talking in regards to suicide itself, I think a big reason why men don't they don't correlate the connection between the suicide and mental health is because they have it as a situational problem, and that is the disconnect. That when we're talking about men go from having problems mentally, they don't see that part. Like, I didn't see that part when I went through it, and it's like, well, it's a situational problem that we need to address in a mental space, but fundamentally they need to feel safe to be able to talk about it, to be able to go, okay, I can get help from this. It's okay to ask for help. There's heaps of other guys that are going through it. It's cool. We can have a conversation. We can get the help. Because most of the time, in my experience, it's been pretty basic sort of stuff. And it doesn't really take that much to change the whole situation for a guy. And then once they've got the light, it's easy. It's on. And then most guys are willing to do the work if they can, join the dots. It's not hard. But if they're feeling like they can't get help, they're isolated, and they're going to be ostracized for asking for that help by anybody in the community, they won't put their hand up and they won't get the help. And this is where we are today. So,
And Sean, can you just tell us briefly about Walk It Off? What Walk It Off in Springfield does?
Yeah, we're up in Springwood, up in the Blue Mountains. Up in the Blue Mountains. We work with Billy's on here as well from Penrith Walk and Talk. Same sort of situation, right? And big shout out to Billy. He's an awesome human being doing some great stuff. Basically, we get together and we're in the building phase at the moment for this. It's fundamentally why I'm on today, to make sure that we're in alignment with where we're looking to go. But it's just a safe place and a community and a brotherhood for guys to come talk and just share. Don't even have to share it, but it's just so that we can build a community around being able to have that space for the guys to be able to talk and feel supported in whatever they're going through.
Yeah, and are you primarily building that sort of men's community through regular meetup to go for get for a walk in the first instance?
Yeah, so we've actually got it for men and women. So we walk on men walk on Wednesdays, women walk on Thursdays, same time at the same place at the bunker up in Springwood. But I think you touched on it earlier in regards to mental health as a whole. Yes, women have their challenges as well as what men do, but we separated the groups. One, we didn't want it to be a dating service for that situation, right? And because the big issue that we were finding was, like, guys have different issues, they view them differently. And so, it was great for, all the support that's out there currently. But what we found was it was mainly addressed to a woman's perspective on how to solve those problems, and guys were getting really disconnected in that space. And so we separated it, and we worked together as a whole, but on the grassroots side of things, the women look after the women and the men look after the men.
Got it. Great. Well, thanks for what you're doing, Sean. Thanks for coming on board and sharing, and good luck with what you're doing. And if you've got some support and mentorship from Billy Beggs at the Penrith Men's Walk and Talk, then you're in some good hands there.
Definitely, yeah. Thanks, mate.
So thanks, Sean. So we're going through the 5 focus areas of the proposed National Suicide Prevention Strategy. The first 2 are enhancing wellbeing as a protective factor, and I think what Sean's described there gives a really nice example of how those sort of community-based groups led by men for men have a really important role to play in that broad enhancing of well-being. The next level up is mitigating the impact of known drivers of distress. Just to locate us in this conversation, I'm going to, because Ben from Men's Table has got his hand up, I'm going to welcome Ben to the conversation, and he can share from whichever of those perspectives, or indeed a different perspective he wants to. But just to locate you in this conversation, we're trying to go through the 5 different proposed focus areas of the National Suicide Prevention Strategy. Oh, was Ben? Oh, is there Ben? So, Robin, if we could give Ben access, that's there.
Sorry, Ben, I think I'm pressing the button at the exact time when you're unmuting as well. Sorry.
Hello.
Testing 1 2. You're on. You're live on Men's Health Connected, Ben. How can we? What have you got to share?
Look, thank you, Glenn. Excellent presentation right up front. Really good. The thing I often wonder about is, and we're heading into some difficult times right now in society. We all know that is the social determinants of what happens. I see a lot of health focus going into trying to when there's a crisis, and that crisis could be suicide, or it could be some kind of other health crisis. It could be obesity, what have you. I think the social determinants are way upstream from that. So from my mind, what happens, something bad happens, and I've had it in my life, something bad will happen in your life, which will tend to lead to isolation and loneliness, which will then lead to bad health outcomes, including suicide. There's no votes in prevention, right? The politicians struggle. They want, there's going to be a vote in putting a new ward on a hospital, but there's no votes in prevention. But certainly to help prevent suicide, the social determinants, particularly for men, have to be looked at, and that's whether it's divorce, whether it's mortgage stress, whether it's you've got to go off Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 to work a terrible job that you hate in order to provide for your family. That's never looked at, that kind of thing. So I think the focus on community, what COVID did for, I think for a lot of people, was underline the fact that in community is really important. And what Sean just talked about, and I apologize if I got your name wrong, mate. What talked about was the importance to be heard. The importance to be heard can't be underestimated in helping men feel they're not isolated. So again, I'm talking about social determinant, isolation, health issue, potential suicide. That's, to my mind, that's how it works. If we look right upstream, and again, I don't need to apologize by saying we see a whole heap of money going into women's issues. Great, that's good. But let's look at the social determinants of why you need shelters for women. Why is that? It's men, right? Normally, not always. We know that. So community is very important, but let's look right upstream for the social determinants. The other thing that concerns me, and we realized this a few years ago, is when we talk to the health system, 80 to 90% of the people we talk to are women. A huge under resourcing in the men's space, and we know the benefit of men talking to men and men-led services. It's really important. So we'd like to see in suicide prevention more men stepping into that space. Really important. And man, when men get it, right? men actually do fully understand it. And you know, I might be un-PC in saying this, and I bloody hell, I won't apologize for it, because it's to my mind, it's a fact, right? The other thing I'd like to talk about is the narrative. The narrative needs to change in society and community. And this is going to be such a slow burn. We can't say, you know, suddenly go, well, men this, men that. It's a matter of really getting out into the media and changing the narrative slowly, because it seems to have swung so far. And a woman said to me recently, she said, well, it's taken us such a long time to get how much we've got. We're reluctant to, so a lot of women are reluctant to give it away. So it needs to kind of maybe swing back a little bit. So there's a lot in that I've just said. But the most important thing for me is the fact that social determinants will lead to isolation and loneliness, which will lead to bad health outcomes, which will potentially lead to suicide. How do we look right upstream for that? How do we persuade the government that this is a good way to go? How do we persuade the politicians that maybe you can get some votes in this somehow?
Yeah, that's great. And it's a challenge I wrestle with too, Ben, because often there's actually you make the point that there's no money in prevention, right? Or no votes. Sorry, you said no votes in prevention. And at the same time, there is a lot of work happening to at least mitigate a lot of those social issues. And in those spaces, there's a whole host of people who've never actually considered the gender side of what they're doing. I mean, even in spaces like homelessness and housing, you know, if you talk to people in homelessness and housing, there's a narrative around gender, which is about the way that it impacts women, but there's not a narrative around gender that talks about the specific issues that men who are homeless face, right? So
yeah,
there's all these other areas of existing activity that contribute to suicide, where we're not taking into account the needs of men and boys. And now that can't be resolved from within a national suicide prevention strategy, but I think that's part of that steady narrative change you're talking about, that we can't resolve an issue as complex as suicide prevention simply through a suicide prevention strategy. We can't resolve an issue as complex as men's health issues simply through a men's health strategy. We've got to work out how we actually make shifts across all these different areas of society. So, and I agree with the plug for more men in suicide prevention. I think that's one area where we can make a really strong case, which is to some extent within the remit of the suicide prevention strategy. So, you know, we can actually, there's a lot of focus on workforce in the mental health and suicide prevention strategies, but not a lot of focus on gender diversity of the workforce. I think there's a really strong and smart case to be made there that could help make a difference. Again, it's not the entire solution, but it's an area where we might have a bit more sort of bit more focus. Ken Barnard, do you want to introduce yourself and let us know who you are for those who don't know, and share what you want to share, Ken? So Ken Barnard, please, Robin.
Thanks, everyone. My role involved with being one of the people who are lived experience people that are providing information to the National Suicide Office, Prevention Office, and the strategy is, if I could just take up Ben's comment about the getting votes or / resources. I'm really interested in the perspectives of that. How you articulated it was absolutely perfect in my mind about there's no votes in it, and we're not able to go ahead and get the resources in suicide prevention overall, purely because yes, you open up a hospital ward, there's votes in it. You open up something to do with suicide prevention, there's no votes in it, therefore there's no imperative. What I was wondering about, because I'm not able to go ahead and provide any observations or statements or anything like that because it's inappropriate. I'm here to listen. I was wondering about asking if it's worthwhile exploring any concepts that relate to the reality that 75% or more of the people who are involved in provision of services in the sector that interfaces with people who are in stress are female. And we recognised all the statistics in terms of males. Is there any creative thoughts about the way in which we could look at how to go ahead and to have the workforce, women in the workforce, more able to understand how to interface with men? It's an open-ended question, but I was just wondering about just a sort of a provocative, is there a creative way of looking at this? And it's just a question. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Ken. Firstly, thanks for all you contributed over the years. I know you've been a really passionate advocate broadly across suicide prevention because of your own personal lived experience, and really value you taking time to be with us today. It's good to know that someone like you is on the lived experience panel and giving some feedback into the National Suicide Prevention Office. Yeah, so let's lean into this a little bit. I'll throw in some thoughts, and I'll welcome what other people have to say. So as I said in response to Ben, I do think this area, and we put it in our recommendations in our national report, this area of workforce diversity, I think is what it's not the entire solution, but it's certainly one where we could make a very strong case for specific action. So we published a report a couple of years ago called our Charter for Men's Mental Health. We had sort of 7 broad principles in that, and one principle 6 was fund grassroots services designed for men. Within that, we talk more broadly about the role that women play in delivering mental health and suicide prevention services to men. I said it earlier, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's really important. It's not the fact that women cannot deliver good service to men. There are women out there right now delivering good services to men. But around 70% of I'm reading this now from our Charter for Men's Mental Health. Around 70% of mental health nurses are women, 72% of psychosocial support workers are women, 77% of peer support workers are women, 79% of psychologists are women, and the majority of telephone counsellors and the majority of people receiving suicide prevention training are also women. So there's a massive gap there. First, you've actually got to win agreement that this is my view. First, you've got to win agreement that that's an issue. You can't do that. You've got to be really careful. You don't do that in a way that's sort of like is critical of women and saying that there's something wrong with those women who are doing the best they can to deliver the best service they can to whoever crosses their path, male or female. But there are recognized principles that a diversity principle is that in public service is that public services should reflect the diversity of the communities they serve. And so it really isn't that radical to say that when 3 in 4 people who die of suicide are men, the fact that 3 in 4 people providing suicide prevention services are women, it's not diverse. So there's a couple of questions that then potentially provokes. One, how can we support those existing providers to become more culturally appropriate? And so there's a world of stuff around training to improve services to men. But then more broadly, how do we make the actual workforce more diverse? Long term, it's things like getting more men into training in psychology, getting more men into nursing, getting more men into counselling, all the rest of it. That's a long-term push that you could certainly make the case for. If anyone's not, I would certainly recommend out of America, Richard Reeves' recent book of Boys and Men, where he talks about the importance of HEAL, which is from memory, it's jobs in health, education, arts, and I forgotten, but it's all those sort of like it might be languages, literacy. He talks about male English teachers, health, education, arts, and literacy. In the way that we've got more women into STEM, he talks about the need to get more men into HEAL. That's, I think, a good thing to advocate for. It's also quite long term, and so there are two areas where you can, as of tomorrow, get more men into providing mental health support. One is volunteering, the other is training. So I believe that this is one additional reason to advocate for more, to put small amounts of funding into more grassroots services run by men for men, because there's amazing services out there, and they're all run voluntarily, and they find it really hard to grow and expand and maintain because they can't employ a person to take care of stuff. They're entirely reliant on volunteers, and yet they're producing male peers. They're actually generating male peers out of the community who want to help and support other men, right? And then the other is actual males is suicide prevention gatekeeper training. The way we deliver it, 70% of people who get it are women. And actually, if you keep funding gatekeeper training but don't say you need to actually try and reach more men, then they'll just keep delivering it in the same way. And so there's two immediate opportunities there. So those are my thoughts, but I know Ben's already touched upon it as well. But I really be interested to hear other people's thoughts, because this is one area where we could put together a proposal to the National Suicide Prevention Office and make more noise, because it's very much aligned to what they're already saying they're going to do, which is around workforce development. And this is me going quiet, see if anyone's got, Ben's coming back in. We've got about 20 minutes to go, by the way, everyone. Ben, when Robin...
very, very quickly, as you were, Glenn, we were at the Suicide Prevention Conference in Canberra, and I won't name it, but we both sat through a presentation from an organisation, and I'm sorry if I'm going to offend anybody here, but it had a list of researchers. It was all about male suicide. Literal researchers, I reckon there were 12, out of the 14 were female. And when they presented, all 6 presenters were female. And I was desperate to put my hand up, but I didn't have the balls, because I thought any moment now I could get cut off and get accused of some kind of un-PC behavior. And I was desperate to do it, but I thought I'd better not, because I could get my head knocked off here. And I've often thought about that. How do you call out stuff like that? Because there needs to be something, everybody can do the job right, but it needs males involved and males having a lead in that kind of space. A little rant from me. There you go.
No, and it's an important one. I mean, I was at the same conference, and I could name a dozen or 20 times when I thought, I've got to say something here. And part of the danger of that is then you always become the slightly annoyed, angry, frustrated person shouting from the sidelines, in very simple terms, what about the men? Which is sometimes it needs to be named. And I think I chose one. I carefully chose 1 or 2 times to stand up and say, what about the men? But when I could do it sort of like in a way that I thought was productive. But I often feel that if I don't say this, no one else in the room is going to mention it. And so, we need to empower more people to step up and say, what you're doing is fine and great. And what about men? And then to know that other people in the room will say, yeah, what about men? And not feel that they'll go, ooh, boo, sis, how dare you say that? So I'm with you, Ben. And at least and what was really positive about that conference was there was a lot of representation from men's organisations in amongst the delegates and some of the stands. So I think we need to keep going to those spaces, even though we often feel that men aren't being focused on, and sometimes that men's concerns might not even be welcome. Because if we run away from that, then that conversation will carry on without us. So we need to keep going to those spaces.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. John for Mentoring Men. Robin, if we could get John on.
Hi guys, look, great session. Look, just on that, I've just been enjoying the chat box, but also different grassroots providers, Glenn, that you've been talking about are popping up in the chat box. So I think, can't remember them all, but maybe there's between 5 and 7 or something. including my mob, Mentoring Men, Men's Table, and then the Springwood Chans, etc., etc. And I forgot the others, but it's not because they're forgettable, but they're really important. But is there the ability to connect these groups? So I've been sort of madly sending an email to that guy, like Ben at the Men's Table, saying, "Hey, can we connect? This is great." And thanks, Glenn, for allowing that. But how can we create as a subgroup within AMH, Australian Men's Health Forum, a sub sort of group where we can connect? So that's what I would suggest, because these groups are lived experience men originated groups. These are really important, and we're kind of like little tiny stars in the universe, and there's these huge planets roaming around, and AMHF can be a planet if it isn't already. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So
Remind
anyway,
me where you're located.
I'm in
John?
Newcastle, and I'm
Newcastle.
with Mentoring Men, who are Sydney based.
Yeah.
I think they're national actually, but anyway, I'm in Newcastle.
Yeah.
And also I'm with the Hunter Homelessness Project with Dr. John Ward, who has mentioned Glenn, mentioned you as well. So, like maybe there's a network. If maybe that's already done, I'm not sure, but I'm sitting here going, wow, look at these incredible groups, and how can we all work together? We're not like competing. I don't think we're competing. Is that helpful? I don't know.
Yeah, so obviously Australian Men's Health Forum, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, we look at a broad range of men's health issues. But when I flashed up that list of 50 organisational members, Mentoring Men is one. So to say Mentoring Men is connected into the forum.
Okay.
Part of what we're trying to do is connect organisations, but we don't only want to connect organisations that are members. Walk It Off and Penrith Men's Walk are not members, but they certainly come along and connect to this, and they're very welcome. So there's that too. One of the ways that we always historically did that was through things like the National Men's Health Gathering. What we are doing right now, there's definitely more we could do, John. There's no doubt. A lot of the networking happens informally. Someone like you will come along to this, you'll see a couple of people, and you'll make connection. But what we're looking to do in our next program, which starts in July, roughly, is to have a series of monthly meetups just for well, I am loosely at the moment, working title, John, is our FAM meetups, for those who are young and funky, and FAM for us is standing for friends and members. So people like yourselves, people like Sean, people like Tom from Regional Men's Health Initiative, people like Ben from Men's Table. Everyone, we just want to find a way to make that appealing to people so that people do come.
Well, look, I really appreciate it, and thanks for the amazing work you're doing. And it's such a great session just to sit here and soak it up. It's my first time doing that, so it's great.
Thanks, John. And then looking more to the National Suicide Prevention Strategy, I think there's more that we can do to put community-based men's groups on the national radar. And I'm looking at what we can do collectively to highlight the fact that all these groups are out there doing great work with no bloody support, and they are they're not the entire solution, but they're definitely part of the solution in terms of improving men's mental well-being and increasing access to the types of support men need when they're in distress. So look, we are running out of time, and we only got two down the list. So just to remind you, the list of focus areas in the National Suicide Prevention Strategy are enhancing wellbeing as a protective factor. We've talked a lot about that, mitigating the impact of the known drivers of distress. We've touched on that a little bit, empowering earlier intervention. So if anyone's got any thoughts on the sort of the key drivers of suicide, and also empowering early intervention, I'm very happy to hear contributions on that. And then there's also a piece around ensuring that the care that's provided in crisis is appropriate and compassionate. But yeah, any thoughts on how the National Suicide Prevention Strategy should be dealing with known drivers of distress? I know Ben listed off a whole host of them. Give us a hand if you want to jump in.
Me again. Me again,
John.
sorry, just briefly. One of the things that are sort of like in my life is normalization of discussion of suicidality is one of the key cultural inhibitors. So no one wants to talk about it. Suddenly you find your son's, killed himself, or daughter's killed herself. And what the hell? How did we get here? So this normalization, especially among men, and the stoic nature of and hyper male culture, we've heard a bit of that from the army side of things. I'm sorry, I can't remember the army fellow, but fantastic stuff, research in that area. Yeah. So look, my to Bob's worth is not normalization. I'd like everyone to be able to talk about suicide if they're feeling that way. That sounds really weird, but anyway, I'll have a go on that one anyway. I hope that helps.
Brilliant. Okay, Kit Scott Robin.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm bereaved by suicide. I've lost my sister and my mum to suicide, and I've also recently lost another friend of a friend. But I feel that when we're not addressing what led to the suicides, the contributory causes, like I feel that we can learn so much from that, sadly. But lastly, like in the coroner's report of my mum's suicide, like they go into detail about the physical body, but again, it's not addressed the contributory causes.
Sorry, you just cut out my internet cut out there. What was the last bit about the contributory causes in the
Yes,
report?
it's not addressed. So the contributory causes of suicide are not addressed.
Right. So it wasn't addressed in the coroner's report, you're saying?
And also, well, it's not addressed even, let's say, I sat in the inquest into my sister's suicide when she was in hospital, but like the hospital system, they focus on the clinical, the physical body again, and they're not addressing the domestic abuse or what's happening outside that's causing the suicide attempts or
There's definitely a genuine attempt to sort of to look at suicide from more than just that clinical response, but we have got so far to go. And what I'm seeing is there's a real risk that is that when government starts to look at things like, okay, let's take the court system as an example. Data tells the government that X% of people who suicide were in contact with the legal system, in the 6 months or whatever before they suicided. So they go, right, okay, so that's an area where we need to look at not just mental health, we need to look at what's happening in the legal system. But then rather than sort of going, that reveals all this complexity of people's lives that needed to be addressed, they will then tend to go, right, we need to train people in the legal system how to refer people to Lifeline, or how to, do a mental health intervention. So it has some benefit in the sense that you're asking people in the legal system not just to treat people as, respondent, defendant, or whatever, and actually think about the bigger picture. But it's not really addressing the causes that are having people in the legal system in the first place. And so that whole shift towards actually addressing the causes of the causes, we've got a really long way to go, and we're only just beginning on that journey. And if we're not careful, everything just reverts back to we need to get people into mental health support, which, as we all know, is a last-minute crisis thing, and in many cases not the most appropriate.
I feel as well, often when we're talking about mental health, I feel that emotional health or relational health isn't addressed. So like mental health is just one part of that, like emotional health, relational health, and mental, whether it be financial health, there's so many other parts of health.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's the holistic approach, right? Okay, look, we've been going for over an hour. I feel like you've all contributed hugely, those who wanted to. There's massive amount of chats in the chat box that we're going to need to go back and look back for. A few people saying, what about a minister for men? great idea in principle. I don't. I think it was a lot. There's a long way off us getting a Minister for Men. It's certainly one mechanism to try and drive addressing many of the broader social determinants that we've spoken about. I don't think it's the only solution or the quickest solution. I've been having the discussion with people about the value of a Minister for Men's Health for over 15 years now, and one of the things that comes up is be careful what you wish for, because a lot of people who want to focus on men as a target group might have an approach that doesn't support your approach. So be careful what you wish for when you call for a Minister for Men, because you might get a Minister for Men you really don't like and really don't support. So that's my thoughts on that for those who want to know it. And I'm going to give you one last chance to chuck in a comment, or if you want to. Otherwise, Billy Beggs, Billy of Penrith Men's Walk and Talk.
How you going, Glenn?
Good,
yeah,
Billy. How are you doing?
Good. My camera's not working.
Okay.
But yeah, listen to all the stuff that has been said, and I agree totally with it. Particularly the last few callers there, Shan and Ben, about the situational distress. So maybe instead of looking at as well as looking at a mental health solution to this here, maybe we should be looking way up the line, as has been suggested, at that situational distress side of things, and having like male mentors there. You'll find that in a lot of towns and cities, there are places where women can go if they're needing to go through the legal system or whatever, but there's none for men. So we had a place, or male mentors for men at that point of reference to support them through these systems. It would take a lot of the stress out of it for them. And then they could link them into other services as well. The group I used to work for, Like Mind, whenever someone came to us with a mental health issue, it was always there was always stressors there, and we were able to bring in people from a lot of the other services, like housing, like legal, to support those people in our building, so that all their issues were being catered for in the one building, rather than sending them off here, there, and everywhere. So if we could do something like that there through these like male mentors and put a lot of support into that, I think it would alleviate the problem down the stream, and you wouldn't maybe need so many people in mental health support. It's just my thought.
Yeah, that's great, Billy. I think that's a fantastic point. And mentors can take many forms, but certainly having formal mentoring programs to help men navigate the challenges and stresses of life is something that could make a huge difference. And it is having a huge difference in other areas. Men need advocates, right? It's not just mentors, it's advocates. It's someone.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. If you go, something as complex as going into the like the family court system, for example, you'll have never experienced anything like that before in your life, and to be able to have someone to help you navigate that and advocate on your behalf is really, really important, and certainly I think something we're really, really missing. So, well, what are we going to do with all of this? With our own limited resources, we do our best to try and raise the profile of men's health issues across a broad range of areas. Like I said right at the very beginning, 50. If you just measure deaths as a measure of men's health, 50 men a day die from potentially avoidable deaths, and around sort of 6 of those are suicide. So suicide is really, really a really important issue for anyone who's concerned with men and boys' health and well-being. And it's also only about 10% of the avoidable deaths that happen every day. That's not to diminish or dismiss it, but it's just to acknowledge that there are other issues out there as well that we are trying to focus on with our very limited team and resources. But in terms of male suicide prevention, well, there is a national suicide prevention strategy being developed right now. We know what it's shaped like. We know there are some opportunities for us to raise the flag and raise the profile of men within that. Today's conversation has really helped shape our thinking. It's great to see so many individuals and organizations who care about this and are passionate about it. and we'll be doing our best to make recommendations on what we would like to see in the strategy, and we will keep you informed, and we'll be encouraging you all and those beyond to actually get in touch with your MPs in the next couple of months, and try and put a little bit of pressure on the system to put more focus on men in the National Suicide Prevention Strategy. So that's us for today. People are asking about the presentation. Yes, we'll just check that there's nothing in there that can't be shared, but I think it can be shared, so that's fine. We'll make that available. Thank you all for your time, and thanks for everyone, all 1,000 of you who've registered to take part in Men's Health Connected in 2020-2023. Our next season starts probably in August, and we'll be sending you information about that soon. But in the meantime, have a happy end of financial year, whatever that looks like for you. We'll see you back here in probably in August. Take care. Thanks for your time.